Is diversity and inclusion destroying our armed forces? A leaked document has revealed that the British Army want to relax security checks. I mean, what are they talking about for potential recruits from overseas in order to boost diversity and inclusion? I mean, this is like the police force thing, isn't it? When they, the vetting of the police officers, it really hasn't gone well. But now the armed forces, Britain's armed forces actually have consistently failed to hit recruitment targets over the past decade, and they're seeking to plug those gaps by increasing ethnic minority representation, which currently stands at about 14% of the regular army, which I think also is about the percentage of ethnic minorities there are in the UK. I think it's 14%. However, the revelations have sparked strong criticism with the former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, saying that the fighting capability of our armed forces mustn't be compromised by the over-application of diversity and inclusion. Meanwhile, Defence Secretary Grant Shapps is said to be furious at the findings and has ordered a root and branch review of diversity and inclusion policies in the armed forces in response. So, for the great British debate this hour, I'm asking, is diversity and inclusion destroying our armed forces? Well, joining me to discuss, senior GBNews political commentator Nigel Nelson, businessman and activist Adam Brooks, former British Army officer Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford, and assistant editor of the London Financial, Andy MacDonald. Right, well, I'm going to start with you, Lieutenant Colonel Crawford. He's a defence analyst and former British Army officer. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, my first thought is that inclusion and diversity should enhance Britain's armed forces rather than denigrate them in any way. The problem is that we're not talking about proportionality in the way that it should be understood, because if we were truly to represent, the armed forces were truly to represent the makeup of the United Kingdom, the population from which it recruits, then 52% of the armed forces would be women, and they're not. And now you can put that down to a lot of things. Equality of opportunity to apply, it definitely applies, but also it's a matter of choice. And as for reducing the security requirements for people coming from overseas, I think that is a route to madness. Because the last thing you want to know, you want is, if you're in the front line, to be wondering whether the guy or girl standing next to you has actually got your best interests at heart, or is indeed an agent for another organisation which would do you harm.
It's just, I'm with you on that. A route to absolute madness. Andy MacDonald, what do you think?
I don't think it's, diversity and inclusion that has destroyed the armed forces in this country. I think it's, the procurement process of how they dish out private contracts for equipment, for supplies and other things like that. That's what's destroying the armed forces. And the fact that we've got a clown at the top of it, the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps. He's been, he was Home Secretary, then Transport Secretary, then Business Secretary, then Energy Security Secretary. And this is only, over the last, I think, 6 years he's had all these jobs. So clearly he's not specialised in defence, so why have we got this guy? He's a far cry from Ben Wallace, the former Defence Secretary, who was agreed cross-party that he was a great Defence Secretary. So, he's a far cry. So we've got a clown at the top and a procurement process that doesn't really work. I don't think this is about diversity and inclusion. This is about a failed Conservative government who have failed the procurement process and don't have a great Defence Secretary.
Well, it's a carousel, isn't it? I mean, they're all whizzing around. Oh, I'll do this one, I'll do that one. What did you do before you did? I don't even think they know. But that's not the question, though. Do you think, though, but diversity and inclusion, though, Adam Brooks, diversity and inclusion, should they be loosening their sort of requirements so that they can get more people of diverse backgrounds?
Definitely not. This woke agenda, as you said, it's weakened the police. When in the 80s, when I was a child, I used to look at police officers and they were 6 foot tall, big, strong, and they were quite intimidating. Now you look at the police officers today, a lot of them, you'd laugh if they run at you. Some of them can't even run themselves. So we've got to be very careful here. There's a shortage of soldiers. We could have less than 70,000 in 2 years. And we've had a top American general say that our army isn't what it used to be. So there's a crisis of numbers here. But there's so many factors. This generation coming through, they don't want to get their hands dirty, a lot of them. They don't want to fight for a country. A lot of them don't even like this country. Oh. So we're going to have, it's a job on our hands to try and get some of these people into the army. I would say maybe increase the salary to try and do it. But I certainly wouldn't want to fight next to someone that is picked just because, on a diversity box-ticking exercise, and hope that he's going to shield me, when a load of bullets come over my head. It's scary.
Well,
Really
it's also kind of deterring white people from coming to the army, because they'll be thinking, well, you know, if there was a time when they weren't looking for white people to apply for jobs in the Navy, and it's just nonsense, or in the Air Force. And as far as you say about young people, they're too busy on TikTok. I know my daughter is. She's like, it's my latest TikTok dance, and I'm like, that's just nonsense. Nigel Nelson, maybe you will support the notion of...
Well, I would certainly support the notion of diversity and inclusion in any organisation, and that includes the Army. The Army have a choice of British citizens, Commonwealth citizens, Irish citizens, and Gurkhas. So there is actually plenty of diversity there. However, I am against any idea that you might boost it by lowering security checks. That does seem to be complete madness. MI5 desperately need Arabic speakers to monitor terrorist chatter over the internet. Now, dual nationals are able to apply to MI5, but you wouldn't expect the place that actually looks after all Britain's secrets to reduce their security checks to get more of them in.
Yeah, Andy, your thoughts there, because, you know, we need more people to join the armed forces. And this is probably an attempt to sort of encourage people from all over the world. They're talking about going to other countries to recruit people. And we do that with other jobs, so why not the Army? I
think in the Army, you know, if you're a member of the Commonwealth, you can apply. I mean, we've got some great international regiments, like you said, the Gurkhas. But I think, from what I understand, this level of vetting, you're still going to be vetted to join the intelligence corps in the Army. It's just a slightly less developed level to make it slightly easier for foreign applicants to apply, from what I understand. But, you know, there's a manpower crisis in the Army, and they've got to figure out how to fix it some way. So, I mean, I don't have any better ideas than them. But
but to me, to fix the crisis doesn't mean to lower the criteria, to make it worse. So you're bringing in people who aren't that experienced or aren't really the right kind of people to fight in the Army. You're just lowering it because we're going to excuse that. And that, I mean, as Adam pointed out, and I did, you know, the police is an exact example of why that doesn't work.
Well, no, I disagree. I mean, you know, Adam spoke about the police in the 80s. You know, the police were still, you know, beating the life out of miners in the 80s. They weren't perfect then, they're not perfect now. You know, the Army had problems in the 80s just like the police did, so it's hard to compare.
Crime's got a lot worse, unfortunately. And just going back to Nana about the security risk here, just remember, only last week I spoke about on this show, an asylum seeker was caught out as being a spy. So do we trust the powers that be now in this country to actually vet these people and realise, you were saying, Nigel, about getting Arabic speakers to help out the Army. How do we know their intentions? You know, so there's so many security risks here. And again, I think the only way you're going to get more recruits into the Army is if you pay them a hell of a lot more than they're paid now, and people start thinking with their wallets rather than their heads. But I think this generation now is lost. They're too soft.
Final word to you, Stuart.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid the root of the problem is not just recruiting, but it's also retention. And I think your other contributors are quite right. To sort this out, we need to pay people better, give them better conditions of service, and I include in that service accommodation where it's required, which has got an awful press at the moment, and rightly so. And then think outside the box. At the moment, lots of recruiting is outsourced to save money to a large multinational company, which I won't mention by name, but I think everybody knows who it is. And they're doing a rotten job. So the announcement this afternoon by Grant Shapps that he's going to do a root and branch investigation into all of this can only be welcomed.
Yeah. All right, so finally, to each of you, and very quickly, Nigel Nelson, is diversity inclusion destroying our armed forces, yes or no?
No.
Adam Brooks, yes or no?
Yes, it is.
Andy, yes or no?
No.
And Stuart, yes or no?
Yes, it is, I'm afraid.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, thank you so much for your thoughts. GBNews senior political commentator Nigel Nelson, Adam Brooks, businessman and activist, Andy MacDonald, political commentator, and also Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford, defence analyst and former British Army officer. Thank you for your thoughts.